Hey guys, it's Cade with Endure Hunt. In this week's video, we're talking about calling in bears. All right, my friends, let's go over a few questions you guys have asked. One of the main questions we get is what bear call do we use? This is the bear call that I like to use. It's the Coyote Bear Buster from Primos. Mine's been used pretty well. It's all the lettering's rubbed off and everything. I love this call. I love how convenient, simple. It's just one call. I always have it attached here to my vinyl harness. I have it on this little string because I've dropped it more than once and I've lost it a few times, but I always seem to find it. Obviously it being green makes it even harder to find. Anyway, this is the call we use. I like it for a few reasons. One of the main ones, I like that it's adjustable. You can adjust this little rubber band here. The higher up on the reed it goes, the higher pitch the call is. The lower it goes, the deeper the pitch is. So that's one feature that I like about it. In our experience, bears kind of need a little bit of fluctuation when it comes to the calling. It's just like, you know, calling in coyotes and stuff. If there's a cadence, you know, if there's constantly the same sound is being repeated, they can tell. You know what I mean? If it's an electronic call, they can tell. They're smart. You know, there's in some situations I feel like they're way smarter than I could ever be. But they can tell if there's a pattern, so you need to make sure you're kind of switching it up. But that's the call we use. That's the first question we always get. The Coyote Bear Buster from Primos. If you want to win one of these, actually, we do have a giveaway this month. It's April 2025. So this month's giveaway, we're actually going to give away one of these. We just gave away like 5 of these 2 months ago. So anyway, so if you want to win this, just make sure you know about our giveaways. We do them every single month. Last month, March, we just gave away some of the Pyro Putty, which is like a lightweight fire starter, the one we're going to be using on our bear hunts this spring. The full details are in the description below, so just make sure you check that out. Make sure you're getting in on that. But that's the call we use. Long story short, the Primos Bear Buster. Trevor, he uses a few different calls. I just like the simplicity of having one call. Called in dozens of bears with this thing. Does awesome. Another question we get all the time is, when do you use a bear call? Why would you use a bear call? In spring bear hunts, typically we're just doing spot and stock. However, there are a few situations where we do pull out the bear call. One of those is obviously if it's really thick. So if you're in a place that has a lot of trees, you know, maybe even the East Coast, that kind of stuff. If you're just in thick trees and you can't see anything, then you're gonna have to probably call in the bears, or you're gonna have to sit. You know, some people do bait, some people do hounds, but it's super easy to go out there and at least try with a call. I don't recommend doing this in grizzly country. We've done that before. It's kind of sketchy and it's a little risky. And I'll probably get into a story in a little bit of my bear 2 years ago that I called in grizzly country. But so the situations: 1, really thick timber. 2, you know, maybe you want to stop the bear. Maybe it's working away from you and you want to stop it, maybe get a shot on it. We've had situations where, you know, we have a bear at maybe like 400 yards and you're locked in. You're like, hey, let's see if we can get it a little bit closer. Bears always react differently. You know, every bear is different. The way you call obviously matters. But sometimes you can bring them in. Sometimes it doesn't matter what you do. That bear's just not going to care. Maybe it'll run away. You know, it doesn't really matter. So sometimes if the bear's a little further away than you want it to be, but you're still locked in on it, we'll try and get it to come a little closer just to see if it comes in. But we only do that if we can, you know, see it. So really thick timber. Maybe you want the bear to come in a little closer. Another thing that we've done is we've done hunts where the whole goal was just to call in bears. So, you know, maybe, like I said, you're in an area that's really thick, and we've done that before. The key is you can't just go in the woods and start hounding on this thing. I mean, you can, and it could work, but the chances are kind of low, especially in the spring. Bears are a lot more concentrated on where they're at. There's lots of great videos on YouTube about, you know, where to find those bears. But the key is, if you can find crap, if you can find bear crap, and it's fresh, chances are the bear's around. So just make sure you're in an area that you know bears are roughly in the general vicinity, and then you can try calling and see if they come in. When you guys call in bears, does it call in other animals? Good question. Totally, all the time. I mean, this is, like I said, this is the Coyote Bear Buster, so it calls in coyotes all the time. You know, it just totally depends. If you watched I think it's episode 1 from season 1, episode 1, we had a deer come in and a bear at the same time, which is kind of crazy. So we've called in deer all the time, which is kind of weird. You know, it's maybe we've called an elk actually, and like a cow elk, thinking that a calf is injured, and so it comes to try and save it. Same thing with a deer. You know, maybe a fawn's just, you know, dying, and this deer comes in to try and save it. So it calls in other animals all the time. you know, you're basically replicating a dying animal or an animal in distress. So any animal that either wants to eat that or, you know, we've called in wolves, coyotes, bobcats, called in all sorts of stuff. So you're sounding like a dying deer, you're sounding like a dying elk, you know, maybe a rabbit, depending on where your rubber band is placed on your call. But anyway, so yeah, we call in other animals all the time. All right, our next question is, how do you make that sound with the call? We got this on one of our spring bear videos. So the way you make the sound is it's just a reed call. There's not a huge science to it. You just blow on this sucker. We like throw in our hand on the back of this so that you can kind of regulate, you know, how much air comes in and out of it. If you'll see, Trevor was very new at this during our last spring trip, so you could see some of his calling. His sound like a goose. Let me see if I can replicate that. Like, that sounds like a goose, obviously. So, like, you know what I mean? Or a goose or some kind of animal, and nothing's really going to come into that. So just make sure you just want it to sound like an animal that's dying, right? Or you want it to sound appealing. If you have a dog, a great example is I'll set my dog across the field and I'll maybe hide or something, and I'll just hound on this thing and see if he's like perks up and he's interested in it. So that's just a little trick that I've used before. But anyway, so I like having it be a little higher pitched. Typically in our experience, the bears like it a little higher. Like I said, I've had bears where I've started on low and I've hounded on this thing, and then I've gone up a little higher, and then once I got to the highest one, then the bear started coming in. So it just depends on the bear. It depends on what they're into. Anyway, all that kind of stuff. So like I said, you can just not even have your hand on it with this Primos Bear Buster. I like that you don't have to have any science to it, just hound on it. So this is with it on the highest pitch. This is what it sounds like. So that's me just directly blowing air straight through it, and it sounds like that. And that's pretty engaging. That's the highest pitch. Like I said, I like to have my fingers over here and kind of add a little bit of variation to it, so it doesn't have that cadence that, you know, the bear could recognize. So that's just me throwing my fingers basically over top of it, and it allows just a little less air to escape, which means it's a little higher pitched. Anyway, so that's one thing you can do. Like I said, you can adjust it, you know, maybe in the middle. This is one ring down. This is, again, without touching the back of it. I was blowing pretty hard. You can tell it almost sounded like a goose there for a second, because if you don't give enough pressure, it kind of has that goose sound. So that's exactly how Trevor sounded in our, I think it's episode 2 or 3. So just make sure you're giving enough air. Obviously this thing's super loud, so it should reach pretty far, but just make sure you're putting a lot of air so it doesn't have that goose sound. If you go all the way down to the bottom, this one's as low as it gets. So again, you could just do it just like that and you'd be totally fine. Don't feel like you have to be fancy and add any fingers to it. There you go. So that one is obviously using the fingers. That one sounds a little more raspy. I kind of like that raspiness, and it worked great. I mean, my dog just perked up and got up and started running to me. So, so if you know what I mean, if you can master, I think just practicing, getting out there and just practicing with it is a great way to do it. But there's really not, I mean, there's a science to it, but not really. I mean, just practice, get out there and just think to yourself, if I was a bear, would I come into this? You know what I mean? Just don't make it sound like a goose. Get some practice, make it sound, you know, you can even go back and watch our videos and see, you know, what ours sounds like and see if you can kind of replicate that. Next question is, how often, how long should you call? That is a great question. Again, I'm not claiming to be an expert in any of this. We've called in, you know, quite a few bears, but that doesn't make anyone an expert. The key is just getting out there and doing it yourself, practicing, and seeing if you can call in bears yourself. In our experience, if you stop calling, the bear is going to stop coming in. It's a little different than what you'd imagine. I mean, you'll see in some of our videos, sometimes we stop and just listen because we just want to listen, you know, see if something's coming in, hear it. If they're really big, a really big bear, you'll hear them come through the woods, you know, breaking down trees and crap. So sometimes you'll see us stop, but typically you just want to keep hounding on that thing until it comes in. So that's what we've done. Like I said, if it's really thick timber, we'll move, you know, maybe every like 15 minutes or so. Depending on your area, you know, if there's snow on the ground like there is here, your call is going to go a lot further, right? So it totally depends on if, you know, how far your call goes. So you can even have a buddy and you could say, hey, just keep walking until you can't hear my call anymore. And then maybe walk 100, 200 yards more, because bear can hear a lot better than you could ever hear. So that's one thing that we've done is, you know, we just had Trevor just start walking, and then that kind of gives us an idea of how far we need to travel before we call again, just because we want to kind of cover and grid the whole area. And if a bear's in the area and it's a big boar, it's going to come to this. And that's kind of the nice part about calling in bears, is that typically a big boar is going to come in every time, and it's not going to be, you know, we've gotten that question, you know, sows and cubs. What do you do if, you know, a sow comes in and you shoot the sow? Well, typically we can see the bear for a little bit and it starts coming in. Typically we don't shoot until it's like at 20 yards. So it's kind of intense calling them in, but we've never run into that issue, just because a sow with cubs isn't going to necessarily risk her cub's safety to go kill a deer or an elk when it could just go eat grass. So that's been our experience. So I don't think you really have to worry about sows with cubs as much. Again, always be careful, know your local regulations, all that stuff. But yeah, so distance totally depends on the area. Just go out as far as you can and then, you know, go to the next spot. We've done it where we go to the top of a ridge and try and kind of call down into the canyon and see if we can pull something out of that canyon, and then kind of move to the next ridge top and just kind of keep moving that way. So that's what we've done. It works for us. As far as length of calling, again, like 15 minutes, I think is kind of that sweet spot. You don't want to be calling so long that, you know, you wear yourself out, but you also don't want to not be calling long enough. Like I said, sometimes the bears will just run directly at you, like they'll charge you. Sometimes they'll kind of meander around and slowly work their way to you. Sometimes they'll just lock down and just start walking towards you. Like, it just totally depends. So we've had all of those happen. So it's just totally like, depends on the bear, depends on your environment. But I would just keep going, you know, allow enough time for a bear that if it was slowly coming to you, it could make it. So next question that we get all the time is setup for calling bears. We've kind of gone over this in some of our bear hunting videos last spring, but your setup's very important. Just like calling in coyotes and everything, you want to make sure you're in cover. You don't want them to come in and see you. They're just like, you know, elk, deer, bears are the same way. They can pinpoint the exact location that sound is coming from. So if you're like, you know, behind a tree, that bear knows that you're direct, like they know that sound is coming from directly behind the tree. So if you have a buddy, that's the best setup to have. Another thing that really happens all the time is the bears will try and flank you. So just because you're calling in a bear and you have this giant open field in front of you, even if the bear was down at the bottom of that field, doesn't mean that it's going to walk straight up at you. And this is why I said it kind of, you know, 20 minutes is kind of that sweet spot, depending on how far your call can go and your environment. But we've, you know, Trevor's bear last year or 2 years ago, this is exactly what happened. Is we were set up. I saw the bear at 200 something yards. I was set up. I already had filled all my tags for the year, so I couldn't. This was actually in the fall. And so I was like, Trevor, there's a bear. And so he had a tag. He tried to get set up on it. He couldn't. And it dipped into the trees. And there was just like, and we sat there for a minute and just didn't ever come out. And so I was like, well, what if I try the call? I tried the call, hoping that he'd come out. You know what I mean? So he was set up. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes it doesn't. After about 10 minutes of calling, nothing happened. And we knew that bear's going to try and flank us, right? Either that bear's gone, either that bear's in the same spot. But the chances are, if he's coming in, he's probably flanking us. So that bear, exactly what happened is he went around the timber and he was trying to get up behind us to get downwind of us. So if you're set up in a spot that you can call, you know what I mean, with the wind in your favor, that's the best scenario, because then the bear can just come in and it won't catch your wind. Obviously, they have insane smell. So being set up that way, sometimes we'll place a guy kind of back behind us, so that if that does happen, the guy can see the bear coming in and shoot it before the bear comes and gets our wind and blows out. That's what happened with Trevor's bear. The bear started coming up the tree line, trying to flank us. Trevor went and cut off the bear before it could get up behind us and get downwind of us, which was an awesome setup. He saw the bear at, I think it was like 50 yards or something, just like right there, and he was staring at it. And that's when he shot his bear. So being set up in the right spot, you got to be cautious of wind. You know, if you have thermals that are shifting, just be cautious of that. Just make sure that when the bear does get to a spot that you can shoot it, right? If you're in such thick timber that you can't even see like, 5 feet in front of you, it's just not a great idea. I wouldn't necessarily hide behind trees. I would get in front of the tree and kind of be in a spot so that you can shoot the bear. Again, if you're doing this in grizzly country, just don't. Just don't. Just don't. How do bears typically respond to the predator call? Every animal is different, and bears are so unique, it's not even funny. Yeah, we've had bears, and this could be partly because of our calling. Sometimes we're not the greatest callers. Sometimes, we get that goose sound, or they can just tell something's up. Maybe they catch our wind. There's no real telling, but sometimes you start calling and the bear just books it away. It just starts bolting. In our experience, that has honestly been when it's been a sow, though, which is interesting because, again, if it's a boar, typically that boar wants to come eat, and a sow is going to try and get away because the sow knows that other boars are going to be attracted to it and wants to get away from the boars. So that's kind of been our experience. If it's a sow or a smaller bear, it doesn't always come in. Sometimes it'll run away. Sometimes it will just sit there and keep eating and act like it doesn't hear anything when you know it can hear it. So it totally depends. In our experience, I've said this before, but the color phase bears do not come into my call. I don't know what it is. I don't know if I'm doing something wrong. I don't know if every color phase bear I've seen is a sow. I don't know what it is, but I'm super superstitious about that right now because I just have never had a color phase bear come in. They've all been the jet black. So I don't know. Take that for what you will, but I am always afraid to try and call on a color phase because I want a color phase so bad all the time. So I'm always a little nervous to call them in. But that's been our experience. They all act different. Like I said, some of them mosey along, some of them run away, and some of them charge. Some of them start walking at you. Some of them go around and try and flank you. You just got to be aware. You got to be super cautious. When you're in the bear woods and you're just sitting there hounding on your call, there's, that adrenaline rush you get is pretty crazy because you're trying to get a bear to come in and for an easy meal, right? And you're that meal. So make sure your guns, make sure you have a bullet chambered, and make sure you're ready to go because it can get dicey pretty quick. What are the common mistakes when calling in bears? I've pretty much covered a lot of them. Making sure your wind's right, making sure your sound is sounding good. I can go over a little bit more about this in a different video, but yeah, just make sure your sound is good. Changing it up a little bit. Like I said, I've started on the lowest rubber band, and I've gone and worked my way up, and it has changed the bear's perspective in like 2 seconds. Like as soon as it goes to that high pitched, I like the high pitched. In our experience, bears like the high pitch. They always come in on the high pitch if they're going to come in. Sometimes they come in on the lower pitch. I like the low one just because it sounds like, especially with that raspy. Like that sounds like a deer or a calf struggling, So I like that raspy. I always start with that raspy sound. And again, all you have to do is just put your fingers over top of it and just restrict the airflow a little bit. You can open it up. You've seen in some of the videos of me like opening this up just to kind of get the airflow. Anyway, you can kind of play around with it. Key is just get one of these and you can figure it out. I've mentioned this a few times, but please just don't do any predator calling in grizzly country unless you really have your head on a swivel. A few years ago, I was calling in, we were doing some bear hunting in some really thick timber, and it was in grizzly country, which is a terrible combo. And I wasn't super smart. Luckily, it ended up being okay. I'm here, obviously. But I was hiking along, and I heard a super loud snap, and I just knew it sounded like a bear. It sounded like a big bear. And for some strange reason, we have the whole story on our Instagram if you want to go read about it. We kind of have a video of the aftermath after the bear came in and everything. But we don't have the actual experience on video, which kind of sucks. But anyway, go check that out on Instagram. But basically what happened is we were hiking through grizzly country, heard a big snap, a big log, kind of sat there, heard it again. We knew there was a bear or something big down there. So I grabbed the predator call. I started hounding on it. As I was hounding on it, it's also kind of nice while you're hounding on it, chambered around so you're kind of covering your sound a little bit. And the bear just came right in. It was probably at like 70 yards originally, and it just came charging in. Luckily, it was a big black bear. It was a 6-something foot black bear, which was very convenient that it wasn't a grizzly. I don't know what I would have done if it was a grizzly. which is why you don't do this. And it came charging in. This one just was running straight at us, and it was at about 20 yards. And I didn't know what else to do, so I shot it, blew out the side of its skull. It was rolling on the ground. I put a few more shots into it just to get it to die. So anyway, so don't do that. But that's a situation where the predator call does work. The big bores. Another thing that I haven't mentioned is typically the calling works better later in the season. If the bears are coming fresh out of their dens, it doesn't always work very well because they're just coming out of hibernation. The nutrient-dense grass is their primary source of calories, so they're not really there's not really a lot of fawns around, there's not really a lot of calves around, they're just not really into it. Once you get later in the season, like beginning of June, during the rut when, the sows and the boars are getting together and breeding, that's typically when the boars are hunting for calves and everything like that. So typically later in the season is going to be a little better for you if you do want to do that strategy or where you're walking through the woods and trying to call them in. But that's been our experience. Again, if you have more questions, we just covered kind of the basics. Again, I'm not claiming to be an expert. We've called in, I don't know, a few dozen bears. So I feel like I know what I'm doing for the most part. But if you guys have other tips or strategies, make sure you put them down in the comments below. If you have other questions, we can throw another one of these videos together. We're going to be putting videos out every single week, so make sure you're subscribed down below. Give us some comments. Make sure you get in that entry, get some entries in for the Coyote Bear Buster for this month. We've given away, I don't know, a lot of these. You guys seem to really like these giveaways, so we're going to give away one more this month, April 2025, so get in on those. Again, our entries are cumulative, so if you get an entry now, just by clicking that subscribe button or you follow us over on Instagram, then you're entered to win every single giveaway that we're going to do every single month. So, and you can keep building those by commenting. So throw us a comment down below, ask us questions, what kind of questions you guys have about calling in bears. Have you guys called in bears? What's been your experience? And let us know. And we'll see you next week.